I think the arc peaks probably at Quest.
This is Nate Burke, who was Driscoll's executive assistant and essentially his chief of staff.
I had concerns before then, for sure. A lot of us did. I mean, even the fact that we pulled Quest off with relatively short period of time, and it burned a ton of people out. But I remember being there and thinking, you know, this is going to go one of two ways. He's going to either walk out there and feel humbled by this thing that he started in his living room, and it's going to be like, wow, 17,000 people, amazing. Or he's going to go out there and be like, conquered. Seattle, check. Did it. And unfortunately, it was the latter.
If there was a feeling of mission accomplished in Seattle, then it made sense that Driscoll would start to redirect his energies beyond the city. But he'd also need a different approach, and over time, a new team, one less rooted in and perhaps less committed to the city itself, ready to retool and build a new kind of machine that could expand globally. Unbeknownst to all of them, a key player was already on the scene who had the capacity to do just that, though he hadn't been hired for that purpose. Nate met him a little later that day.
And interestingly, then we went over to a Mariners game, and he threw out the first pitch, which is pretty funny. You know, I got to do that. But then I sat down next to and met Sutton. That was the day I met Sutton.
Sutton is Sutton Turner. He'd just been hired to work for Jamie Munson, the executive pastor.
And that really, the wheels really started to come off at that point.
The arrival of Sutton on that day is a landmark for a number of former Mars Hill staff, because for some, he became just as much a villain as Driscoll in those final years. He was hired by Jamie Munson, the executive pastor, to be the church's general manager, which meant he was supposed to be running operations like finance, facilities, and HR. But within just a few weeks, Jamie would resign. Some thought because of burnout from pulling off Quest Field. Sutton would overnight be promoted to executive pastor. And the contrast between a guy like Sutton and a guy like Nate is kind of a metaphor for the transition the church was undergoing in that season. If you look at Sutton's resume, for instance, it says CEO over and over, including work throughout the Middle East. He'd primarily come to Seattle not for the job, but because of the church's ministry. He wanted to learn and grow spiritually and had been listening to Mars Hill's teaching online. When he saw a position available at the church, he applied for it, and he got hired. And then he got thrown in the deep end in a highly dysfunctional organization. Nate, on the other hand, was the consummate Mars Hill insider.
You know, I mean, I remember, you know, being at places where, especially traveling, and Jesse talks about this too, where it's like, if we were there, or if I was there, whoever, we were the representation of the Mars Hill man, right? In, you know, King of Prussia, Pennsylvania, or wherever the heck, you know, or London, or South Africa, or wherever it was. And I remember him describing, you know, the Mars Hill man's like, he's tatted up, you know, he does squats, and he's carrying a baby. And I'm like, he just described me. And there's kind of like, at some point, you're like, oh, that's cool. You know, I'm like, I'm a cool guy. And then at some point, you start realizing.